This is a video for section 2.6, limits involving trig. And in this example, we're going to go through a problem that involves cosine and using that identity. All right, so let's go through it. This isn't a problem in your book, but it's similar to number 44 in section 2.6. Okay, so it says the limit as x approaches 0 of 1 minus cosine 3x over x. All right, first step with these types of problems is we try direct substitution. So wherever we see an x, we're going to plug in a 0. On the top, I get 1 minus cosine of 3 times 0, just 1 minus cosine of 0. Remember, cosine of 0 is 1, so 1 minus 1. Over on the bottom, I plug in 0 for x. I get 0 over 0. We all know what this means. Indeterminate form means we need to do more work. And what kind of work do we need to do? Well, we need to somehow simplify this function so that when we plug in 0 again, we'll get a valid answer. Or if we make this function match a rule that we know, we'll be able to just plug in what that rule tells us. And conveniently, we have a trig identity for both sine and cosine functions when we're talking about limits. And the identity for cosine functions tells us that if we have a limit as x approaches 0 of 1 minus cosine x over x, that limit is just equal to 0. So for these types of problems, when we're trying to simplify them and they involve trig, our first step is to always rewrite the function in terms of sine and cosine, which it already is, so that's good. And our second step from there is we're going to try to make this function match its identity. So we're dealing with cosine, so we're going to look at the cosine identity. Like we just said, the identity tells us that if we have 1 minus cosine of x over x as x approaches 0, the limit is just 0. Okay, so looking at our function here, it doesn't exactly match our identity, right? We have 1 minus cosine of 3x over x. Those aren't the same things. So what we need to do is multiply this function by some number so that now it matches our identity. So I have the limit as x approaches 0 of 1 minus cosine 3x over x. What can I multiply this by in order to make it match that? Well, the part that's different is that this something is different from this something. So I can multiply this by 3 over 3 to make this bottom 3x, and that way the bottom will match the top angle. And remember, whatever I do to the bottom, I need to do to the top of the fraction as well. So when I multiply that together, I get the limit as x approaches 0 of 1 minus cosine 3x over 3x. Remember, I still have my 3 in the numerator here. And from here, wherever my cosine function matches the identity, I'm just going to cross it out and put 0. So this section right here matches the identity now. I have 1 minus cosine something over that same something. So I'm going to cross that out. That's just 0. And I'm just left with a 3. But 0 times 3, that just gives me 0. So that means that the limit as x approaches 0 of that function that we started with, when I simplified it, multiplied by 3, I was able to see that it was just 0 times 3, which is 0. And that's the final answer for this problem. Brief recap. So I started with this function here. I tried direct substitution. It didn't work. So I tried to make this trig function match its identity by multiplying by 3 over 3. And when I did that, part of it was able to cancel out because it just matched the identity directly. And then I was just left with 0 times 3, which gave me 0.